The blood wouldn't wash out. Marlo Ashford scrubbed at the crimson stains soaking through the linen bandage in her hands, watching the water in the basin turn pink, then red, then darker still. 3 years had passed since Crimson Valley. 3 years since she'd held Dorian's hand as the light left his eyes. 3 years and still the blood remained. Not on her hands, she'd scrubbed those raw long ago. The blood lived deeper now, in the hollow space behind her ribs, where her heart used to beat with purpose. The refugee tent smelled of antiseptic and despair. Marlo moved between the wounded with practiced efficiency, her healer's bag worn smooth from years of service. A young mother clutched a fevered child. An old man coughed wetly into a rag. A boy, no older than 7, sat alone staring at nothing, his left arm ending at the elbow in fresh bandages. War took many things: limbs, lives, the ability to sleep without screaming. Drink this. Marlo pressed a cup of willow bark tea into the boy's good hand. He didn't respond. She knelt before him, meeting eyes that had seen too much. What's your name? Silence. I'm Marlo. I was a combat medic during the war. Southern 3rd Division. She kept her voice steady, a calm port in the storm. I've seen what you've seen, and I'm still here. You will be too. The boy's fingers trembled around the cup. He drank. Marlo stayed kneeling until he finished, then moved to the next patient and the next and the next. This was what remained when the cannons fell silent. This endless procession of broken bodies and shattered souls, each one a reminder that she hadn't been fast enough, skilled enough, present enough to save the one person who mattered most. Outside the southern capital of Ashenvale, sprawled beneath a heavy sky. 3 months since the peace treaty. 3 months since the killing officially stopped. The hatred Marlo had learned took longer to die. Sister Ashford. Marlo turned to find Elder Octavia in the tent entrance, her weathered face shadowed by a hood. At 68, the old woman carried herself with the authority of someone who'd earned every year, every scar, every wrinkle of wisdom etched into her dark skin. She was the matriarch of the Southern Pax Council, and when she spoke, even alphas listened. Elder. Marlo straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. I didn't expect you today. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Marlo followed the old woman out into the gray afternoon past rows of refugee tents that stretched toward the horizon like a city of ghosts. They walked in silence until they reached the memorial gardens, where thousands of carved stones bore the names of the fallen. Marlo's feet carried her to the same spot they always did. Dorian's marker stood beneath a willow tree, simple granite etched with his name and rank. Captain Dorian Ashford, died at Crimson Valley, beloved husband, faithful servant, gone home. You visit him every day, Octavia observed. Someone should remember. Oh, child, the old woman's voice softened. Half the South remembers. He was a hero. But you remember him every breath, every heartbeat, every moment you punish yourself for still being alive. Marlo's jaw tightened. Is there a reason you came to see me, Elder? Octavia settled onto the stone bench beside Dorian's grave, her joints creaking with age and old injuries. The peace is fragile, a thread stretched too thin. The North and South signed papers, exchanged hostages, drew new borders. But signing a treaty doesn't heal what war broke. I know. Do you? Octavia's dark eyes found her. Because I need you to do something that will either strengthen that thread or snap it entirely. Marlo felt the words coming before they arrived, heavy as stones. I need you to go north. The world tilted. Marlo gripped the back of the bench. No. The Northern Capital Shadowcrest, they've requested medical liaisons. Cultural exchange, they call it. Proof that we can work together, heal together. I'm sending 3 healers. You're one of them. Send someone else. Anyone else. I'm sending you because you understand loss. Because if you can bridge that gap, others will follow. Octavia rose, placing a hand on Marlo's shoulder. You have 2 days to prepare. The transport leaves at dawn. And if I refuse, Octavia's expression hardened, then you dishonor every patient in that tent who's trying to heal. You dishonor the peace so many died to achieve. And you dishonor the healer you swore to be when you took your oaths. The words landed like blows. Marlo wanted to rage, to scream, to tear the world apart with her bare hands. Instead, she stood very still, staring at her husband's grave, feeling nothing and everything at once. 2 days, Octavia repeated. Then she was gone, leaving Marlo alone with the dead. That night, Marlo packed her medical bag with hands that didn't shake. She'd learned that trick in the war. Don't think, don't feel, just move. Bandages, sutures, antiseptic, surgical tools, herbs for pain, for fever, for sleep. The tools of her trade, each one a small weapon against death. She held Dorian's wedding ring up to the lamplight, watching it catch and throw back gold. She'd worn it on a chain around her neck since they'd returned his body. Some widows removed their rings. Marlowe couldn't. It was the last piece of him she could touch. I'm going north, she whispered to the empty room. I don't know why. I don't know if I can do this. But I have to try. The ring offered no answer. It never did. Dawn came cold and colorless. Marlowe joined two other healers, a young man named Thomas, who'd lost his leg, and a middle-aged woman called Petra, who'd lost her daughters at the northern gate. They traveled in silence, each wrapped in their own grief, each carrying their own ghosts. The journey took 5 days. 5 days of watching the landscape shift from southern grasslands to northern forests. 5 days of seeing fewer and fewer friendly faces, follows more and more suspicious stares. 5 days of Marlowe's wolf sleeping quiet in her chest since Dorian's death beginning to stir with unease. Shadowcrest rose from the forest like a fist of stone. Dark walls, darker towers. The northern capital wore its strength like armor, daring the world to test it. Marlowe felt small approaching those gates, felt the burden of enemy territory pressing down on her shoulders. They were processed at the border like cargo. Papers examined, bags searched. Questions asked and answered with careful neutrality. Then they were escorted into the city proper, and Marlowe got her first real look at northern life. The streets were crowded. Market stalls lined the main thoroughfare, selling everything from fresh bread to forged steel. Northern wolves moved through the crowd with an ease that spoke of safety, of home, of belonging. Children laughed. Vendors shouted. Somewhere someone was singing. It looked like any city. It looked like home. Marlowe hated that most of all. You're to report to the central medical facility, their escort said. His northern accent was thick, his manner brusque. Quartermaster will assign you housing. Mind your manners and your place. We don't need southern trouble here. Thomas bristled. Petra placed a calming hand on his arm. Marlowe said nothing. She'd learned in the war that silence was its own kind of armor. The medical facility was impressive. Clean, well-stocked. Light poured through high windows illuminating rows of beds, surgical stations, and apothecary that rivaled anything in the South. Marlowe felt a reluctant approval. Whatever else the North was, they took care of their wounded. Southern healers. The head physician, a stern-faced woman named Helena, looked them over with the expression of someone inspecting livestock. You'll work the refugee quarter, minor injuries, basic care. Don't touch anything you haven't been cleared for. Don't go anywhere you haven't been assigned. Clear, Marlowe said. They were given a room in the medical dormitory, small, sparse, functional. That first night lying on an unfamiliar bed in an enemy city, Marlowe stared at the ceiling and tried to remember why she'd agreed to this. Octavia's words echoed. Dorian's memory pressed against her ribs. Outside, northern voices drifted through the window, speaking in accents that reminded her of battlefields and blood. She didn't sleep. The next morning, Marlowe reported for duty in the refugee quarter. It was the same everywhere, she discovered. Wounds that wouldn't heal, eyes that had seen too much. The walking dead who hadn't gotten the message yet. She fell into the rhythm of it. Clean bandage, comfort, move on. Don't think. Don't feel. Just do. 3 days passed, then 7, then 10. On the 11th day, Marlowe was granted her first afternoon of liberty. Go see the city, Helena said. You're no use to anyone if you burn out. So Marlowe walked. She followed the main market road Ember, her therapy wolf companion, a silver-coated beast who'd been her shadow since the war, padding silent at her side. The market was chaos and color scents and sounds crashing together in a symphony of commerce. Marlowe kept her head down, her hood up, trying to be invisible. She was examining a stall of medicinal herbs when she heard it. A child's voice. High, frightened. Please. We're lost. Marlowe's healer instincts activated before her brain caught up. She turned toward the sound, pushing through the crowd, and found them in a narrow alley between stalls. 3 small girls. Wolf cubs, clearly, though, they wore human form. Their clothes were fine, too. Fine for this rough part of the market, delicate dresses in shades of blue and silver that caught the light. The eldest couldn't have been more than 8. The youngest looked barely 5. And all 3 of them had eyes like liquid gold ringed with violet. Royal coloring. Marlowe's stomach dropped. Are you lost? The words came out before she could stop them. The eldest girl turned, and Marlowe saw intelligence beyond her years in those strange eyes. Yes, our guardian was supposed to meet us at the Central Plaza, but we cannot find our way back. Marlowe scanned the area. They were deep in the merchant quarter, in a section where anti-Southern sentiment ran hot. She'd heard the whisper, seen the graffiti. Peace is treason. Remember our dead. Southern dogs go home. These cubs, clearly Northern nobility, were in the wrong place. Dangerously wrong. Where's your escort? Marlowe asked, her voice rougher than intended. We became separated when the crowd surged. the eldest explained with remarkable composure. We tried to find our way back, but you got more lost, Marlowe finished. She should walk away. Not her problem, not her people. But these were children. And even after everything the North had done, the packs they'd slaughtered, the territory they'd seized, the husband they'd taken, she couldn't leave cubs in danger. Not when she'd sworn oaths to heal, to protect, to serve. Fine. The word tasted like ashes. I'll get you back to the Central Plaza. Stay close. Don't touch anything, and don't wander off. The cubs nodded solemnly. The middle child reached out tentatively and touched Ember's fur. The wolf, usually selective about who she allowed near, leaned into the touch. Trader Marlowe thought at her companion. What are your names? Marlowe asked as they began walking, Ember taking up a protective position at the rear. I am Cordelia, said the eldest. These are my sisters, Freya and Zinnia. Marlowe nodded curtly. Marlowe Ashford. The wolf is Ember. They navigated the winding streets slowly. Marlowe kept her hand near the small blade she carried, illegal for a southern visitor, but she'd been a soldier before she was a healer, and old habits died hard. The cubs stayed close, occasionally reaching out to touch Ember's silver fur with delighted giggles that seemed out of place in the grim surroundings. Your wolf companion is magnificent, Cordelia said. Is she a warrior beast? Marlowe almost smiled. She's a therapy wolf, and yes, she's seen combat. Like you, Zinnia asked softly, her small hand finding Marlowe's. Marlowe looked down at the child, at the trust in those violet-ringed eyes, and felt something crack in her chest. Yes, like me. They were halfway through the merchant quarter when Marlowe realized something was wrong. The normal bustle had been replaced by an eerie quiet. Shops were closing early. People were moving with purpose, heading away from something. What's happening? Marlowe asked a passing northern wolf. The male glanced nervously at the cubs, then at Marlowe. Public announcement. All gatherings suspended. Royal decree. Royal. Marlowe's blood went cold. She looked down at the three small girls in their fine dresses with their golden eyes and perfect manners. Who exactly are you waiting for? She asked, voice hardening. Before Cordelia could answer, the commotion erupted nearby. The thundering sound of armored boots barked orders in the harsh northern tongue. A squad of soldiers, no, not soldiers, royal guards in ceremonial armor, poured into the street ahead. Royal Guard, Cordelia whispered, suddenly frightened. Please, we cannot be found here. They'll think... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. 3 royal cubs in the rough quarter, unescorted with a southern stranger. The optics were catastrophic. Marlowe cursed under her breath. Whatever trouble these cubs were in, she was now firmly in it with them. This way. She led them toward a quieter side street away from the main thoroughfare. They found shelter in the shadow of a massive stone pillar supporting one of the market's loading docks. The area was deserted. We'll wait here until things calm down, Marlowe said, leaning against the pillar and sliding down to sit. Ember settled beside her, alert but calm. The cubs exchanged glances. Then Zinnia, the smallest, approached cautiously. May we sit with you? We're tired. Marlowe nodded reluctantly. Just stay quiet. To her surprise, all 3 cubs immediately settled around her, their small bodies pressed against her chest as if seeking protection. Cordelia positioned herself on Marlowe's left. Freya and Zinnia curled up on her right, heads resting against her shoulders. The heat was immediate, overwhelming. Cubs ran hotter than adult wolves, their metabolism burning bright. Marlowe felt it radiating through her clothes into the cold spaces where grief had made its home. She started to protest, but the cubs had already closed their eyes, their breathing slowing into the steady rhythm of sleep. Marlowe sighed, resigned to her fate. Ember watched her with amber eyes that seemed almost amused. Not a word, Marlowe muttered to the wolf. The burden of the day's patrol, combined with the unexpected cube sitting, began to take its toll. Marlowe found her own eyelids growing heavy. The cubs felt safe and trusting pressed against her, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than the gnawing emptiness of loss. Purpose. However temporary, however complicated. She told herself she'd rest for just a few minutes, just until the commotion died down. Just until she could safely return the cubs to wherever they belonged and wash her hands of northern problems. Her eyes closed. She woke to cold steel pressed against her throat. Southerner, the voice was ice and iron. Do not move. Marlowe opened her eyes to find herself surrounded. At least a dozen northern royal guards in gleaming armor, their weapons, silver blades, and crossbows all pointed at her. The cubs were still there, all 3 peacefully curled against her chest, asleep despite the commotion. Ember stood tensely at her side, a low growl building in her chest. Stand down, Ember, Marlowe commanded softly. The wolf reluctantly complied, but remained vigilant. The circle of guards parted, and a figure stepped forward. Marlowe had seen kings before. In the war, she'd treated wounded nobility, had watched generals posture and preen. She developed a healthy contempt for crowns and the heads that wore them. But this man, this alpha, was something else entirely. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in black furs and leather that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His hair was dark as midnight, falling to his shoulders, with some sections braided with silver and bone beads that clicked softly when he moved. His face was carved from stone. High cheekbones, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a jaw that could have been sculpted by an artist who understood violence. But it was the eyes that stole Marlowe's breath. Golden, ringed with violet, exactly like the cub sleeping against her chest. This was Alpha King Caspian Ironveil, the northern king whose forces had battled the southern packs across 3 territories before finally agreeing to peace. The king whose soldiers had killed her husband. The king whose daughters were currently using her as a pillow. Marlowe's wolf silence since Dorian's death stirred in her chest, not with attraction, with recognition. This was a dominant alpha, and her omega biology screamed submission, screamed yield, screamed bow. She bit down hard on her tongue, using pain to stay upright. She would not kneel, not to him, not ever. Well, she thought grimly, this is how it ends. The king's eyes swept over the scene. His sleeping daughters, the southern woman they'd chosen as a bed, the therapy wolf standing guard. His expression was unreadable, but Marlowe could feel the pressure of his presence like a physical weight. Rise, Southerner, he commanded. His voice carried the kind of authority that made even the stones listen. Marlowe carefully shifted the sleeping cubs, gently laying them on the ground before standing to her full height. Even in her travel boots, she was a full foot shorter than him. But she'd learned in the war that height meant nothing. Courage was the only measurement that mattered. Your Majesty, she said, offering a stiff military bow, just low enough to be respectful, not low enough to be submission. Marlowe Ashford, Southern Medical Corps. The king's piercing eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. Marlowe Ashford, you have something that belongs to me. With respect, Your Majesty, they found me. They were lost in the roughest part of Shadowcrest. Dangerous territory for anyone, especially royal cubs. A flicker of something concerned perhaps crossed his features before disappearing behind the mask of royal composure. And you decided to what? Abduct them. The guards tensed. Ember growled. Marlowe held his gaze. I decided to protect them, she replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Which is more than I can say for whoever was supposed to be watching them. Dangerous silence fell. The king's eyes narrowed. Marlowe prepared herself for the possibility that the fragile peace might end right here, with her executed for insulting northern royalty. Instead, to her shock, King Caspian laughed. It was a rich, deep sound that seemed to catch even his guards off guard. The tension in the air shifted, though it didn't quite dissipate. You have courage, Marlowe Ashford, he said. Few would dare speak so boldly to me. He gestured to his sleeping daughters, and fewer still would earn such trust from my cubs. They're selective about whom they favor. As if on cue, Zinnia stirred and blinked awake. Seeing her father, she jumped up with a delighted cry. Papa, you found us. She rushed to him, and the king knelt immediately, his entire demeanor transforming from intimidating monarch to concerned father. He embraced her, his large hands gentle on her small frame. Yes, little flower, I found you. The other 2 cubs woke at the commotion, both looking relieved. Freya ran to her father. Cordelia approached with more decorum, but Marlowe could see the relief in her young face. The Southerner was most kind, Papa, Cordelia said. When we became separated, she guided us away from danger. Did she now? The king's gaze returned to Marlowe, assessing her with new interest. And how did you come to be sleeping with my daughters, Marlowe Ashford? Marlowe felt heat rise to her face. They were tired. I offered to let them rest while we waited for the situation to calm down. I didn't expect to fall asleep myself. She was warm, Zinnia offered helpfully, like sunshine on cold days. The king's lips curved slightly. Indeed. He rose to his full height, and Marlowe had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Marlowe Ashford of the Southern Medical Corps. I find myself in the unusual position of owing a debt to a Southern wolf. My daughter's safety is beyond value. No debt necessary, Your Majesty. Anyone would have done the same. Would they? His tone suggested he knew better. I think not, particularly not a Southern healer in Northern Territory so soon after war. Marlowe said nothing. He wasn't wrong. I have a proposition for you. The king stepped closer, and Marlowe caught his scent. Pine, snow, something wild and clean that made her wolf whine with confused longing. The peace between our packs is new and fragile. My daughters, as you've discovered, have lost their mother. They struggle with grief, with trust, with the shadow of what they've seen and lost. I have counselors. I have tutors. I have guards. But what I don't have is someone who understands loss the way you clearly do. Someone who can speak plainly. Someone they've already chosen to trust. Marlowe blinked in surprise. With respect, Your Majesty, I'm a healer, not a counselor. Precisely, Caspian said, his golden eyes gleaming. I have counselors aplenty. What my daughters need is someone who won't treat their grief like a political problem. Someone who understands that healing takes time, takes patience, takes truth. He stepped closer, still close enough that Marlowe could feel his body heat. Besides, he added, voice dropping, my daughters seem to have taken a liking to you. They have excellent instincts about character. Marlowe glanced at the three cubs watching with hopeful expressions. Even Ember seemed to be giving her a look that said, well, this isn't really a request, is it? She asked quietly. Caspian's smile was wolfish. No, it's not. How long? Initially 1 moon cycle, after which we can reassess the arrangement. Marlowe considered her options, which were effectively none. She was in enemy territory, with enemy royalty being offered a position she had no qualifications for. But those cubs, those small trusting cubs, had looked at her like she was safe, like she mattered. And Marlowe hadn't felt like she mattered in a very long time. I'll need to inform the medical facility, she said. Already taken care of, Caspian replied. Your head physician seemed quite eager to loan you to the Northern Court. Something about fostering goodwill. Of course, Helena would be. Having one of her healers serving in the Northern Royal Court was a political coup. When do I start? Immediately, my transport awaits. The royal party began to move. Guards fell into formation. Cubs chattered excitedly about having a Southerner at court. Marlowe followed, feeling like she'd stepped into a current too strong to fight. As they walked, Caspian fell into step beside her. Away from his guard's ears, he spoke lower. There is something you should know, Marlowe Ashford. My daughters have not spoken freely about their mother's death to anyone. They've been locked in their grief, unable to move forward. In the span of 1 afternoon, you've done what months of counselors could not. You gave them safety. You gave them comfort. You gave them permission to rest. He paused. That is a gift I cannot repay. But I can try. Marlowe felt something uncomfortable in her chest. I just did what any healer would do. No, you did what a good person would do. There's a difference. They reached the royal transport, a massive carriage drawn by 6 dire wolves, each one large as a horse. The cubs had already boarded, their excited voices drifting through the windows. Marlowe hesitated at the entrance. This was a mistake. She knew it with the certainty of someone who'd made enough mistakes to recognize them coming. But the cubs were watching through the window, their golden eyes bright with hope, and Marlowe found she couldn't walk away. After you, Caspian said, gesturing to the entrance. Marlowe stepped aboard with Ember at her heels, and the door closed behind them with the finality of a cell lock. Through the window, she watched Shadowcrest roll past and tried to ignore the feeling that she'd just walked into something far more dangerous than any battlefield. The royal palace rose from the heart of Shadowcrest like a crown of stone. Dark towers stretched toward a gray sky. Banners bearing the northern crest, a wolf's head silhouetted against a full moon, snapped in the wind. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the approach, each one snapping to attention as the royal carriage passed. Marlowe felt small, out of place, enemy in the enemy's home. The cubs didn't notice her discomfort. They'd spent the journey peppering her with questions. What was the South like? Did she have children? Why was Ember's coat silver when most therapy wolves were gray? Marlowe answered carefully, editing out the war, the blood, the way Dorian had looked when she pushed the memory down. Not here, not now. The carriage stopped in a grand courtyard. Servants appeared like ghosts, efficient and silent. Caspian disembarked first, then offered his hand to help Marlowe down. She ignored it, stepping down on her own. She saw his lips twitch with what might have been amusement. Stubborn, he observed. Independent, Marlowe corrected. There's a difference, yes. Inside the palace was overwhelming. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, tapestries depicting northern victories, including, Marlowe noted with clenched jaw, the Battle of Crimson Valley. She forced herself to look away, to focus on the cubs tugging at her hands, trying to show her everything at once. This is the East Wing. This is the portrait gallery. This is where we take lessons. This is girls. Caspian's voice was gentle but firm. Give Marlowe space to breathe. She'll have time to learn the palace. A woman appeared in the hallway ahead. She was older, perhaps 55, with silver threading through dark hair pulled back in an elegant knot. She wore northern nobility like a second skin, but her eyes were kind when they landed on Marlowe. Marlowe Ashford, this is Lady Isolde Thornberry, Caspian said. She serves as court advisor and has graciously agreed to help orient you to palace life. Isolde dipped her head in greeting. Welcome to Shadowcrest Healer Ashford. I understand you've had quite an eventful afternoon. You could say that, Marlowe replied. Come, I'll show you to your quarters. The children can visit once you've settled. The cubs protested but were quickly ushered away by palace staff. Marlowe watched them go, feeling unexpectedly bereft. Caspian remained. Lady Isolde will take good care of you, he said. If you need anything, ask her. If you have concerns about the cub, bring them to me directly. You'll find I'm more accessible than most kings. Is that supposed to be comforting? Marlowe asked. His smile was slight. That depends on whether you find directness comforting. I find it rare. Then we'll get along well. He left with a swirl of furs and authority. Marlowe watched him go, trying to reconcile the intimidating king with the gentle father she'd witnessed. It was easier to hate him when he was just a crown, just an enemy, just a symbol of everything the North had taken from her. It was harder when he was human. Come, Isolde said kindly, I'll show you your rooms. The quarters she was given were far nicer than anything she'd expected. A spacious bedroom with windows overlooking the palace gardens, an adjoining sitting room, a washroom with a deep tub. Ember immediately claimed a spot near the fireplace. This is too much, Marlowe said. Nonsense, you're caring for the royal children. The king wants you comfortable. Isolde gestured to a wardrobe. I've taken the liberty of arranging some appropriate clothing. Palace life has certain expectations. Marlowe looked at her travel-worn leathers and practical boots. I'm a healer, not a courtier. You're both now, but don't worry, the king values competence over performance. Be yourself and you'll do fine. Isolde moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, if I may. Please. The court will test you. You're Southern, you're common-born, you're serving in a position usually reserved for Northern nobility. There will be whispers, rumors, challenges to your presence. Isolde's expression hardened. Don't let them rattle you. The king chose you for a reason. Trust that. After Isolde left, Marlowe sank onto the bed and dropped her head into her hands. What had she gotten herself into? She was supposed to be here as a healer, proving that North and South could work together. Instead, she was playing governess to enemy royalty, living in a palace built on Southern blood, serving a king whose army had. A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. Come in. The door cracked open and 3 small faces peered through. Cordelia, Freya, and Zinnia had changed into simpler dresses, their formal court wear replaced with comfortable play clothes. May we come in? Cordelia asked. Marlowe should send them away, should maintain professional distance, should remember that these were Northern cubs. Enemy cubs, cubs of the man whose forces had killed her husband. But they were also children. And they were looking at her with hope, with trust, with the fragile vulnerability of young ones who'd lost too much too soon. Come in, she heard herself say. They rushed inside like a dam breaking. Zinnia immediately gravitated to Ember, burying her small hands in silver fur. Freya examined the room with quiet curiosity. Cordelia approached Marlowe directly. We wanted to thank you, the eldest said with grave formality, for today, for protecting us, for not leaving us even though we're Northern, Marlowe supplied gently. Cordelia nodded. Papa says the war made enemies of good people. That peace means learning to be friends again. Is that true? Marlowe felt her throat tighten. How did you explain to an 8-year-old that peace was complicated, that hatred ran deeper than treaties, that some wounds never fully healed? I think, she said slowly, that your father is wise, and that friendship takes time, but it has to start somewhere. Can it start with us? Zinnia asked from Ember's side. 3 pairs of golden eyes watched her, waiting, hoping. Marlowe thought of Dorian, of the way he'd believed in the possibility of peace even as war consumed them. Of his last words, promise me you'll keep healing. Promise me you won't let the hate win. She'd promised, and then she'd spent 3 years doing exactly the opposite, letting grief turn to bitterness, letting loss turn to stone. Maybe it was time to try something else. Yes, Marlowe said, it can start with us. The cubs' faces lit up like dawn breaking. And despite everything, despite the palace, despite the king, despite the burden of history pressing down on her shoulders, Marlowe felt something shift in her chest. Not healing, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the first small seed of possibility that there was more to living than just surviving. That evening, after the cubs had reluctantly returned to their own quarters, Marlowe stood at her window, watching Shadowcrest lights twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere in this enemy city, people were living their lives, loving, laughing, building futures instead of mourning pasts. She touched Dorian's ring where it hung against her heart. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered. I don't know if I can do this, but I promised I'd try, so I'm trying. The ring offered no answer, But tomorrow she knew the cubs would return, would look at her with those trusting eyes, would ask her questions and tell her stories, and slowly, carefully begin to chip away at the wall she'd built. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what both she and they needed. The letter arrived on a morning thick with fog. Marlo woke in the palace chambers that had become familiar faster than she'd expected. The evening after her arrival felt like weeks ago already. Time moved strangely in Shadowcrest. Moments of crisis stretched into hours, while peaceful days disappeared like water through cupped hands. Breakfast with the cubs had become routine. It started the second morning when she'd come down to find them already eating, and Caspian had simply gestured to an empty chair as if her presence was expected, welcome, necessary. Now, 2 weeks later, she couldn't imagine mornings any other way. They discussed the cubs' progress. So, Cordelia was excelling in her studies but struggling to make friends her own age. Freya had nightmares most nights about her mother. Zinnia had started asking questions about death that neither of them knew how to answer. This morning, though, the routine shattered. The messenger found Marlo in the palace gardens, watching the 3 cubs attempt to build a flower crown for Ember, their small fingers clumsy with enthusiasm. The envelope bore the southern seal. Marlo's hands trembled as she opened it. Elder Octavia was dead. The words blurred. Marlo read them twice, 3 times, trying to make them mean something else. But death was unambiguous. The old woman had passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family, leaving instructions that Marlo should return immediately for the funeral rites. Marlo, Cordelia's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you unwell? Marlo looked up to find 3 small faces watching her with concern. She folded the letter carefully, precisely using the mechanical action to keep her hands from shaking. I have to go home, she said. Someone very important to me has died. Zinnia's eyes filled with tears. Are you coming back? The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. Was she? The smart answer was no. Take this convenient exit. Return to the south where she belonged. Stop this dangerous dance of caring for enemy children, of feeling her walls crack every time the king looked at her with those impossible eyes. But the cubs were watching her with the same expression they'd worn that first day in the market. Lost, frightened, hoping she wouldn't abandon them the way death had abandoned them. Yes, Marlo heard herself say, I'm coming back. The journey south was a blur. Wolf, her brother-in-law, Dorian's younger brother, met her at the border. He looked older than she remembered. Grief did that, carved years into faces, turned vibrant people into ghosts of themselves. Marlo. He embraced her, and she felt the familiar shape of family, of shared loss. I'm sorry. I know she meant everything to you. She was the only one who didn't let me disappear, Marlo said. The funeral was held in the memorial gardens where Dorian's stone stood. Half the southern pack attended, healers, warriors, civilians who'd been touched by Octavia's wisdom over her 68 years. They spoke of her strength, her vision, her unwavering belief that peace was worth the cost. Marlo stood beside Dorian's grave and felt the heaviness of 2 losses pressing down on her shoulders. After the ceremony, Wolf found her alone. She left you something, he said, handing her a sealed envelope. Made me promise to give it to you after. Marlo opened it with numb fingers. Inside, Octavia's familiar handwriting sprawled across the page. My dear girl, if you're reading this, I've gone to join the ancestors. Don't mourn me long. I've lived a full life and died satisfied. Dorian came to me the night before the Battle of Crimson Valley. He knew somehow that he wouldn't return. He made me promise something, and I'm passing that promise to you now. He said, if I fall, make sure Marlo lives, not survives lives. Make sure she laughs again, loves again, finds purpose beyond grief. Tell her I don't want a widow who stops at my grave. I want a woman who keeps walking, who keeps healing, who honors my memory by choosing joy. You're in the north now, working with their children, their king. Good, that's the life I wanted for you, not hiding in the south, not frozen in the past, but building something new, something that matters. Live, Marlo. That's the only way to honor the dead, by refusing to join them before your time. With all my love, Octavia. Marlo read it 3 times, then she folded it carefully and placed it over her heart next to Dorian's ring. What did it say? Wolf asked. That I need to go back. To the north. Yes. Wolf studied her face. The cubs you mentioned in your letters, they matter to you. They've lost their mother. They're drowning in grief just like we were. Just like we are. And I can help them. Marlo paused. I think maybe that's what I'm meant to do now. Use what I learned from losing Dorian to help others who are lost. Wolf nodded slowly. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. Not because you didn't break, but because you kept going even when you were broken. He paused. But Marlo, the North killed him. Don't forget that while you're helping their children heal. I haven't forgotten, Marlowe said quietly. I'll never forget. But maybe she thought forgiveness and forgetting were different things. Maybe you could remember the pain and still choose to move forward. Maybe that was the bravest thing of all. She returned to Shadowcrest 5 days later. The palace seemed different somehow. Brighter, or maybe she was different. Maybe Octavia's letter had shifted something fundamental in how she saw the world. The cubs were waiting in the courtyard when her carriage arrived. They rushed to her the moment she stepped down, their small bodies colliding with hers in a tangle of arms and relief. You came back, Zinnia cried. I promised, didn't I? Marlowe knelt to embrace them properly, feeling their fierce heat seep into the cold places grief had left behind. I keep my promises. We missed you, Freya said softly. We made you something. Cordelia held out a carefully folded paper. Marlowe opened it to find a drawing, 3 small figures and one larger one, all holding hands beneath a tree. It's us, our new family. Something broke open in Marlowe's chest, not painfully, more like ice cracking under the first real warmth of spring. It's perfect, she whispered. She looked up to find Caspian watching from the palace steps. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and Marlowe saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Relief, deep and genuine, as if her return mattered to more than just the cubs. He approached slowly, giving the cubs time to release her. Marlowe Ashford, he said formally, though his eyes were warm. Welcome home. Home. The words settled over her shoulders like a cloak. Thank you, Your Majesty. Caspian, he corrected. When we're not in court, just Caspian. I think we're past formalities, don't you? She should maintain distance, should remember protocol, but the cubs were tugging at her hands and the King Caspian was looking at her like she was something precious that had almost been lost, and Marlowe found she didn't have the strength to build those walls back up. All right, Caspian. His smile could have lit the entire kingdom. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Marlowe woke early, joining Caspian for breakfast with the cubs. They discussed progress and setbacks, small victories, lingering struggles. Tell me about Southern grief rituals, Caspian said one morning, his coffee growing cold as he listened. How do you teach children to honor the dead without being consumed by loss? So Marlowe told him about memory gardens, about planting flowers that bloomed in cycles, reminding you that life continued even when it felt like the world had ended. About making offerings not of sorrow but of gratitude, choosing to celebrate what was rather than mourn what wasn't. We could do that, Caspian said thoughtfully. Create a garden for Celestine. Let the cubs plant it themselves. They'd like that. It would give them something active to do with their grief instead of just carrying it. His eyes met hers. You're very wise for someone so young. I'm 30, and wisdom is just pain that's been lived through long enough. That's a bleak philosophy. It's a realistic one. But when she helped the cubs plant that garden, watching their small hands dig in the earth, hearing them laugh when Zinnia got dirt on her nose, Marlowe felt something that wasn't bleak at all. She felt useful, needed, part of something larger than her own grief. Caspian worked beside them, his large hands gentle with the delicate seedlings. He told stories about Celestine, funny ones, warm ones, memories that celebrated her life instead of mourning her death. The cubs listened with shining eyes, and Marlowe watched the king transform from intimidating monarch to grieving husband to devoted father, all in the span of an afternoon. He was, she realized with growing alarm, a good man. That was so much harder to reconcile than if he'd been a monster. 3 weeks after the funeral, the training session started. The palace has had security issues, Caspian explained, leading her to a private courtyard used for combat practice. I want you to be able to defend yourself, and the cubs if necessary. Marlowe raised an eyebrow. I was a combat medic. I know how to defend myself. Show me. So she did. Years of muscle memory took over blocks, strikes, evasions. She moved through the forms with practiced efficiency, years of war training flowing back like water finding its course. Caspian watched with interest. You're good, but you rely too much on speed. What happens when you face someone stronger? I don't. Humor me. He moved into her space and Marlowe's breath caught. This close she could see the gold flecks in his violet-ringed eyes, could smell pine and snow and something uniquely him, could feel the heat radiating from his body like a furnace. Her Omega biology screamed, submit, yield, bow to the Alpha. She locked her jaw and held her ground. If someone grabs you here, his hand closed gently around her wrist. What do you do? Marlowe's mind went blank. All her training, all her experience wiped clean by the simple contact of his skin against hers. She swallowed hard. Twist against the thumb. It's the weakest point. Good. Now do it. She tried. Her body felt clumsy, uncoordinated. Caspian's grip was gentle but firm, giving her enough resistance to learn, but not enough to truly trap her. Again, he said when she fumbled. Don't think, just move. They practiced for an hour, Caspian's hands on her shoulders adjusting her stance, on her hips correcting her balance, on her arms guiding her through defensive positions. Every touch was professional, appropriate, necessary for instruction. Every touch set her skin on fire. You're distracted, he observed. I'm out of practice. Liar. But he said it gently with something that might have been understanding. We can stop if this is uncomfortable. No, Marlo squared her shoulders. I need to learn this. You're right about the palace being dangerous. Something flickered in his eyes. Has someone threatened you? No, but I hear the whispers. Southern infiltrator. Common-born pretender. Enemy sympathizer. I'm not naive enough to think everyone approves of my presence here. Caspian's expression hardened. If anyone, I can handle whispers, but if those whispers turn to action, I want to be ready, for the cub's sake. He studied her for a long moment. You really care about them? Of course I do. They're children. They're enemy children. Northern royalty. The daughters of the man whose army killed your husband. Marlo flinched. He'd never mentioned Dorian before. Never acknowledged the wall of bones that stood between them. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Since the first day. I have intelligence reports on every Southern national in my territory. Marlo Ashford, widow of Captain Dorian Ashford, fell at Crimson Valley. Combat medic, distinguished service. Honorable discharge after her husband's death. His voice softened. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple, sincere, and they cracked something open in Marlo's chest that she'd kept carefully sealed. Are you, she asked, sorry your forces killed him? Your war took him from me. My war took people from everyone, including me. Caspian's jaw tightened. Celestine died because of complications from stress during the war. The pregnancy was already risky, but the constant threat, the fear, the burden of being queen during conflict, it weakened her. By the time Zinnia was born, she was too fragile to survive the birth. Marlo stared at him. I didn't know. How could you? We don't share our griefs across battle lines. We just keep bleeding and assume the other side doesn't hurt the same way we do. He took a step back, putting professional distance between them. I am sorry about your husband. Genuinely. War makes us all killers and victims at once. I hate that I was part of what took him from you. He believed in peace, Marlo said quietly. Even at the end, even when he was dying in my arms, he made me promise I'd keep healing, keep trying, keep believing it was possible. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. Marlo touched Dorian's ring beneath her tunic. He was everything. Caspian nodded slowly. Celestine was my everything too. And when she died, I thought I'd never feel whole again, that the best I could hope for was functioning, going through motions, being king and father, but never quite being alive. What changed? His eyes found hers. You did. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy, significant, impossible to take back. Caspian. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know it's too soon, too complicated. You're grieving. I'm grieving. We're trying to build peace between our peoples while navigating personal loss. But I want you to know that you've reminded me what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing. Watching you with my daughters, seeing the way you care for them, the way you understand grief without being destroyed by it, you've given me hope that maybe healing is possible. For all of us. Marlo didn't know what to say. Her heart was pounding. Her wolf was howling with confused longing. Every instinct screamed to run to protect herself, to not let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But Caspian wasn't asking for closeness. He was just telling the truth. And there was something beautiful in that, something brave. I don't know what I'm doing here, Marlo admitted. I came to the north hating everything about it, hating you, hating your people, planning to count the days until I could leave. But the cubs, they need me, and I need them. They give me a reason to get up in the morning that isn't just duty or obligation. They make me want to try them. That's all any of us can do, Caspian said. Try. And hope that trying is enough. They stood there in the training courtyard, two grieving people who'd found each other across battle lines, and Marlo felt the first real flutter of possibility. Not love. Not yet. Maybe never. But something softer than hatred. Something gentler than indifference. Something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, hearts broken by war could be mended by peace. The possibility lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, Lord Percival Grimwood requested an audience with the king. Marlowe had met Percival exactly once at a formal dinner shortly after her return. He was a northern noble with cold eyes and colder manners, the kind of man who assessed everything and everyone for their political value. He'd looked at Marlowe like she was a stain on the palace carpets. Now he stood in Caspian's study, his expression severe. Your Majesty, we need to discuss the matter of succession. Caspian looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing. I have 3 daughters. Succession is clear. You have 3 daughters and no heir apparent. The council grows concerned. Marlowe, who'd been reviewing the cub's educational progress in the corner, she'd become a near constant presence in Caspian's study, somehow felt the temperature in the room drop. Cordelia is heir apparent, Caspian said with forced patience. Northern law allows for female succession. Northern law allows for it. Northern tradition prefers sons. And more importantly, Your Majesty, you're unmarried. A king without a queen leaves the succession vulnerable. The peace is fragile. We need stability. We need... Let me guess, Caspian interrupted. You have a candidate. Percival smiled. Several, actually, but one in particular I think you'll find suitable. Lady Venetia Ashcroft. Excellent bloodlines. Well-educated. Beautiful. And most importantly, from a family with strong ties to the border regions. Marrying her would solidify those alliances. Marlowe's hands stilled on the papers. She kept her eyes down, her expression carefully neutral. I appreciate the council's concern, Caspian said coldly, but my personal life is not subject to their approval. With respect, Your Majesty, it is. The late king signed a pre-arrangement contract with the Ashcroft family before his death. You inherited that obligation when you took the throne. Excuse me? The contract stipulates that if you haven't married within 4 years of becoming king, the arrangement with Lady Venetia becomes binding. It's been 3 years and 9 months, Your Majesty. 3 months remain. Caspian stood slowly, his full height and presence filling the room like a storm front. You're telling me I have a marriage contract I knew nothing about. The late king kept many things private, but the contract exists. The council has verified it. And frankly, Your Majesty, this solves multiple problems. You need a queen, the cubs need a mother. The kingdom needs stability. Lady Venetia provides all 3. The cubs have everything they need, Caspian said quietly, dangerously. Do they... Forgive me, Your Majesty, but a southern commoner playing governess is hardly a suitable maternal figure for northern princesses. Marlowe felt the words like a slap. She forced herself to keep breathing evenly, to not react, to remember her place. That's enough. Caspian's voice could have frozen fire. Marlowe Ashford has done more for my daughters in weeks than any northern noble has in years. You will speak of her with respect, or you will leave. I mean no disrespect, Percival said smoothly. I'm simply being realistic. The Ashford woman is a temporary solution. A queen is permanent, and the contract gives you 3 months to choose marry of your own will, or the arrangement becomes binding. I suggest you at least meet Lady Venetia before making any hasty decisions. Get out. Your Majesty, get out. Percival bowed stiffly and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. Caspian stood at the window, his back rigid with tension. Marlowe carefully gathered the papers she'd been reviewing, preparing to give him privacy. Don't go, he said without turning. She froze. I'm sorry you had to hear that. His voice was rough. Percival is a political opportunist who cares more about alliances than people. But unfortunately, he's also right about the contract. I remember my father mentioning the Ashcrofts once. I didn't realize he'd formalized anything. It's not my concern, Marlowe said quietly. Your marriage is a matter of state. Is it? He turned to face her. Or is it also a personal matter that affects everyone in this palace, you, the cubs, the life we've been building here? Caspian, I don't want to marry a stranger for political expediency. I don't want my daughters to have a stepmother chosen by contract rather than care. But I also don't want to plunge the kingdom into crisis by refusing a legal obligation. Marlowe set the papers down. Then meet her, Lady Venetia. Maybe she's wonderful. Maybe the cubs will love her. Maybe this is the universe giving you an easy answer. And if she's not wonderful, if the cubs don't love her, if I don't, he stopped himself. Then you'll do what you always do, Marlowe said. What's best for your kingdom, for your daughters, for the peace that so many people died to achieve. Even if what's best for them isn't what I want. Especially then. That's what makes you a good king instead of just a man with a crown. He crossed the room to her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. And what if what I want is standing right in front of me? Marlowe's breath caught. Then you're looking at the wrong thing. I'm a temporary solution, remember? Here to help the cubs heal. Nothing more. You're so much more than that. You have to know that. What I know, Marlowe said, stepping back to put space between them, is that you're a king who needs a queen, and I'm a southern widow who doesn't belong in northern courts. Whatever this is, it can't be anything real. We're just two grieving people finding comfort in each other. That's not a foundation for anything lasting. Isn't it? No, it's not. She left before he could argue, left before she could do something foolish like admit that she'd started to care, that watching him with his daughters made her heart ache, that his smile had become the best part of her day, that she'd begun to dream of futures instead of dwelling in pasts. Lady Venetia Ashcroft arrived 3 days later. She was everything Percival had promised. Beautiful with dark hair and violet eyes that marked her as high northern bloodline. Educated, speaking 4 languages fluently. Poised, moving through the palace like she already owned it. And most devastatingly, genuinely kind. The Cubs hated her on sight. She's not Mama, Zinnia announced at dinner the first night. No one's asking her to be Mama, Caspian said gently. She's just visiting. She smells wrong, Freya added. Freya, that's rude. It's true, Cordelia said with 8-year-old bluntness. She smells like politics and ambition. Marlowe smells like home. Marlowe, sitting at the far end of the table as propriety demanded now that a potential queen was in residence, felt her cheeks burn. Venetia smiled graciously. I understand it takes time to adjust to new people. I'm patient. We'll get to know each other slowly. The Cubs were not interested in slowly. They sabotaged every interaction. Salt in Venetia's tea, frogs in her chambers, accidentally stepping on her dress hems. Cordelia claimed Venetia gave her headaches. Freya had sudden stomach troubles whenever Venetia was near. Zinnia simply cried and asked for Marlowe. I apologize for their behavior, Caspian said to Venetia after a particularly disastrous afternoon tea. They're not usually like this. Children are perceptive, Venetia replied. They sense when someone is trying to replace someone important. Her eyes drifted to Marlowe, who was attempting to convince Zinnia to stop hiding under the table. Perhaps if the current companion weren't so present, they'd be more open to accepting me. The implication was clear. Marlowe was the obstacle. That night, Marlowe found Cordelia in the memory garden, staring at Celestine's flowers in the moonlight. She's not going to be our mother, the girl said. That's not your choice to make, sweetheart. It should be. We're the ones who have to live with her. Marlowe sat beside her on the garden bench. Your father has to think about more than just what makes you comfortable. He has to think about the kingdom, about alliances, about politics instead of people. I know. That's what queens do. They're political tools, not family. Cordelia's voice was bitter. Is that what you think, that Mama was just a political tool? Of course not. Then why can't Papa marry someone he actually cares about instead of someone the council chose? Because life isn't fair, Marlowe wanted to say. Because grief doesn't give you permission to choose happiness. Because sometimes duty matters more than desire. But looking at Cordelia's fierce little face, she couldn't bring herself to crush that hope. Sometimes, she said instead, the universe gives us what we need instead of what we want. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those turn out to be the same thing. That's a non-answer. Yes, it is. 2 weeks after Venetia's arrival, the garden party happened. It was meant to be a celebration of the peace treaty's success, a showcase of North-South cooperation. Dignitaries from both sides attended. Nobles, merchants, citizens who'd fought in the war and now tried to build peace. Marlowe wore one of the dresses Isolde had provided, simple but elegant in deep green that brought out the amber in her eyes. She stood near the refreshment table, trying to be invisible, watching Caspian move through the crowd with Venetia at his side. They looked good together, like they belonged. Like the king and queen the Northern Kingdom deserved. The Cubs, dressed in matching silver dresses, refused to leave Marlowe's side. We could trip her, Zinnia suggested. We could put honey in her shoes, Freya added. We could tell everyone she picks her nose, Cordelia finished. We're not doing any of those things, Marlowe said firmly. We're being polite and appropriate and giving your father the space he needs to make important decisions. But we don't like her, all 3 chorused. You don't have to like her. You just have to be civil. The explosion happened at sunset. One moment the garden was full of laughter and music and the gentle clink of glasses. The next fire bloomed from the eastern corner like a deadly flower. Streams erupted. People ran in all directions. Smoke billowed thick and black. The Cubs, Caspian's voice cut through the chaos. Where are my daughters? Marlowe didn't think. She moved, pulling all 3 girls behind a stone pillar, using her body as a shield. Ember materialized from the smoke teeth, Baird positioning herself between the Cubs and the danger. Stay down, Marlowe commanded. Don't move. More explosions, smaller. Targeted. Someone had planned this. This wasn't an accident. Guards poured into the garden, weapons drawn. Caspian fought his way toward them, his face a mask of controlled terror. He reached them and immediately gathered his daughters into his arms, checking for injuries with shaking hands. "They're fine," Marlowe said. "I've got them." "Thank you." The words were raw, honest. "Thank you." Then he was gone, coordinating the response, being the king his kingdom needed, even as fear for his children threatened to break him. Lady Isolde found Marlowe and the cubs huddled behind the pillar. "Come, quickly. We need to get you to the safe rooms." They ran through smoke-filled corridors, guards surrounding them. The safe room was deep in the palace, reinforced stone and steel. Other nobles were already there, frightened and shaken. Venetia was among them, her dress torn soot on her face. She rushed to the cubs. "Thank the gods you're safe." The cubs pressed closer to Marlowe. It took hours for the all-clear to sound. Hours of waiting, wondering, fearing. When they finally emerged, the garden was destroyed. 6 people dead, 14 injured, and evidence of a coordinated attack, explosives placed strategically timed to cause maximum chaos. Someone wanted to restart the war. Marlowe helped tend the wounded through the night, back to being a healer, doing what she did best. Caspian worked beside her when he could, when he wasn't coordinating with his security forces or reassuring terrified nobles. They didn't speak. There was no time. But every time their eyes met across a patient, Marlowe felt the connection between them strengthen. 2 people who understood crisis, who knew how to function when the world fell apart. Dawn came gray and exhausted. Marlowe was bandaging a young guard's burns when Caspian found her. "You should rest." "So should you." "Later. First I need to—" He stopped, his jaw working. "You saved them. Again. You put yourself between my daughters and danger without hesitation. Anyone would have—" "No, they wouldn't have." Venetia ran to the safe room. Most of the guards secured the exits. "You stayed with 3 small children and used your body as a shield. That's not duty. That's not even bravery. That's love." Marlowe's hands stilled on the bandage. "Caspian, I'm not finished. I've been lying to myself. Telling myself I could marry Venetia for the kingdom, that political alliance was more important than personal happiness, that what I feel for you is just gratitude or shared grief or—" He stopped, took a breath. "But last night when I thought I might lose them, when I saw you protecting them, I realized the truth. I'm falling in love with you, Marlowe Ashford, and I don't know what to do about it." The words hung in the air between them. Impossible. Honest. Terrifying. "You have 3 months until that contract becomes binding," Marlowe said quietly. 3 months to find a way out of this or accept it. Either way, what you feel for me can't matter. I'm Southern. I'm common. You're everything," Caspian interrupted. "But you're right. My feelings don't change politics, so I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm going to announce my engagement to Venetia. I'm going to fulfill my father's contract. I'm going to be the king my kingdom needs. That's the right choice." "Is it?" "Because it feels like the worst thing I've ever done." He walked away before Marlowe could respond, and she stood there in the ruined garden, watching him go, feeling her heart break into pieces she wasn't sure she could gather back up. The engagement was announced 3 days later. Formal, public, binding. The cubs cried. Marlowe held them and told them everything would be all right, even though she wasn't sure she believed it. That night, Caspian came to her quarters. "I don't want this," he said without preamble. "I know. I want you. I want us. I want the life we could have built. I know that too. Tell me to fight this. Tell me to find a way out of the contract. Tell me you'll stay and be what my daughters need, what I need." Marlowe felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I can't. You're a king before you're a man. Your kingdom needs this alliance. Your daughters need stability. And I need to let you go before I fall so deeply I can't climb back out." He crossed the room to her, stopping close enough that she could feel his warmth. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb, brushing away her tears. "One thing," he whispered. "Give me one thing to remember when I'm standing at that altar, pretending I chose this." "Caspian, please." So Marlowe rose on her toes and pressed her forehead to his, the northern gesture of deepest respect, of connection, of love that couldn't be spoken but could be shown. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people who'd found each other across battle lines, across grief, across impossible odds. 2 people who couldn't be together but couldn't quite let go. Then Marlowe stepped back. "Go," she whispered. "Be the king you need to be." He left without another word, and Marlowe sank to the floor, letting the tears come, letting the grief wash over her, wondering how she'd managed to survive one great loss only to walk straight into another. She didn't see Cordelia watching from the shadows. Didn't see the eldest princess's expression harden with determination. Didn't see her slip away to find her sisters and begin planning the final phase of their campaign. Papa's going to marry the wrong person, Cordelia announced to Freya and Zinnia. We have to fix this. How? Zinnia asked. The contract is binding. Contracts can be broken if you have the right information. Cordelia's eyes gleamed with intelligence beyond her 8 years. And I think I know exactly what information we need. Remember what I heard last week when we were playing in the old tower? The voices, Freya asked. The plotting, Cordelia corrected. We need to hear more. We need proof. The three cubs huddled together, their young minds working through problems adults had deemed unsolvable. Because children they knew saw things adults missed. And sometimes the smallest wolves had the biggest teeth. Outside Marlowe's quarters, Caspian leaned against the wall, eyes closed, feeling the burden of duty crushing the life out of hope. In 3 months, he'd marry Venetia. In 3 months, he'd seal his fate and Marlowe's. In 3 months, everything they could have been would become nothing but a painful memory. Unless something changed. Unless someone found a way to break a contract that seemed unbreakable. Unless 3 determined cubs succeeded where adults had failed. The moon rose over Shadowcrest, cold and distant and beautiful. And beneath it, hearts broke and plans formed, and the future balanced on a knife's edge, waiting to see which way it would fall. The royal library was silent in the hour before dawn. Marlowe sat at the long oak table surrounded by medical texts she wasn't reading, watching the first pale light creep across the floor. Sleep had become impossible. In 3 months, Caspian would marry Venetia. In 3 months, Marlowe would return to the south, her purpose here fulfilled. In 3 months, she would learn to live with another loss. The door opened softly. Cordelia slipped inside, followed by her sisters. All 3 wore nightgowns, their feet bare, their expressions serious. You should be sleeping, Marlowe said. So should you. Cordelia climbed into the chair beside her. But you've been coming here every night for 2 weeks, we noticed. Of course they had. Children noticed everything adults tried to hide. I have some reading to catch up on. Liar. Freya settled on Marlowe's other side. You're sad because Papa's marrying the wrong person. Zinnia crawled into Marlowe's lap, curling up like she had that first day in the market. We don't want you to leave. Marlowe wrapped her arms around the small body, feeling the familiar heat against her chest. Sometimes we don't get what we want, little flower. Sometimes duty matters more than desire. That's what Papa says too. Cordelia pulled a leather folder from behind her back. But what if duty and desire could be the same thing? What if there was a way to fix everything? Cordelia, there's no way to break a royal contract. There is if the contract was made under false pretenses. The 8-year-old's eyes gleamed with triumph. And if one of the parties is guilty of treason. Marlowe went very still. What are you talking about? We've been investigating him, Freya said, ever since Lady Venetia arrived. Something felt wrong about her, about Lord Percival, about the whole arrangement. So we listened, Zinnia added. We're small. Adults don't notice us. Cordelia opened the folder. Inside were pages of careful notes in a child's handwriting, sketches, dates, names. We can slip through servant passages, hide in corners, listen at doors, and we heard things, important things. You shouldn't have. Lord Percival has been meeting with Lady Venetia's brother, Cordelia continued, in secret, in the old tower that's supposed to be closed for repairs. They talk about after Papa dies, about who would control the kingdom, about restarting the war because war makes money. Marlowe's blood went cold. Are you certain? We recorded them. Freya held up a small device, modern technology used for palace security. Papa had these installed in the old tower after the garden attack. They're supposed to be secret, but we know where they are. We've been downloading the recordings every week. For how long? Since the week after you came back from the funeral, Cordelia said. We knew something was wrong, so we started watching, waiting, collecting proof. Marlowe stared at these 3 small girls who'd been playing investigator while she'd been drowning in grief. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because adults don't listen to children, Cordelia said with a practicality that broke Marlowe's heart. They pat our heads and tell us we're imagining things. We needed proof no one could dismiss, and now we have it. Show me. They spent the next hour going through everything. The recordings were damning. Percival's voice cold and calculating, discussing how the arranged marriage was just the first step. How Venetia would make Caspian weak dependent. How an accident could be arranged once a male heir was born. How Venetia's family would serve as regents for a child king effectively controlling the northern kingdom. How war with the South would resume within 2 years because conflict made certain people very rich. This is treason, Marlowe whispered. We know. Cordelia's young face was grave. That's why we need your help. We can't go to Papa directly. He'll try to protect us, keep us out of it. But if you present this to him with Lady Isolde as witness, he'll have to act. And if the contract was part of a treasonous plot, it's void. Right? Marlowe's mind raced. Political law wasn't her expertise, but she knew enough. A contract made under false pretenses as part of a conspiracy against the crown would indeed be considered void. You brilliant, terrifying children, she said. You could have been hurt. If Percival had discovered— He didn't, Zinnia said simply. We were careful, like you taught us. Always have a plan, always know your exits, always protect what matters. I taught you that. You show us every day, Cordelia said. How to be brave when you're scared. How to do the right thing even when it's hard. How to protect the people you love, no matter what. Marlowe felt tears burn her eyes. We need to take this to your father now. They found Caspian in his study, already awake, already working. He looked exhausted. Grief had carved new lines around his eyes, shadows beneath them, that spoke of sleepless nights. Marlowe, he stood immediately. Then he saw the cubs. What's wrong? Is everyone all right? Papa, we need to tell you something, Cordelia said, and you need to listen, really listen. Not as a father who wants to protect us, but as a king who needs the truth. Caspian's expression shifted. He gestured them closer. Tell me. So they did. Marlowe stayed quiet, letting the cubs present their evidence in their own words. Cordelia led, explaining their investigation with the kind of detailed precision that would have made any intelligence officer proud. Freya provided timeline documentation. Zinnia handled the recordings, her small fingers surprisingly deft with the technology. Caspian's face went from concerned to shocked to coldly furious. When the final recording played, Percival's voice calmly discussing the best way to stage a hunting accident, the king's hands clenched into fists. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Dangerously. Weeks, Cordelia admitted. We needed to be sure. We needed proof that would stand up in council, not just children's accusations. You could have been killed. We were careful. You're 8 years old. Almost 9, Cordelia corrected. Then more softly, we couldn't let him take you from us too. We already lost Mama. We can't. Her voice broke. Caspian was across the room in 3 strides, gathering all 3 daughters into his arms. You should never have had to do this. This is my job. Protecting you is my job. And protecting you is ours, Freya said firmly. That's what families do. He looked at Marlowe over their heads. You knew about this for approximately 1 hour. I was bringing it to you immediately. Thank you. The words carried weight. Trust. Something deeper than gratitude. Lady Isolde was summoned, then Commander Victor. The evidence was reviewed, verified, cross-referenced. By noon, a full investigation was underway. By evening, they had enough corroborating evidence to make arrests. Percival was taken during dinner, surrounded by guards, his smug expression finally cracking when he saw the council members' faces. Venetia was found in her chambers packing. She'd somehow gotten word that her brother had been arrested. She didn't deny the accusations, simply stood with cold dignity and demanded a lawyer. The trial was swift, the evidence too overwhelming to dispute. Percival had indeed orchestrated the garden attack meant to kill Caspian and several key peace advocates. Venetia's family had funded it, seeing chaos as opportunity. The arranged marriage was designed to give them legal access to the throne before moving to more permanent solutions. They'd been willing to kill for power, to restart a war that had already claimed thousands of lives, to sacrifice peace on the altar of profit. The council was horrified. The citizens, when news broke, were outraged. Anti-peace sentiment existed certainly, but even those who'd opposed the treaty drew the line at regicide and manufactured war. Through it all, Marlowe stayed close to the cubs. They were handling it better than most children would. They'd known what they were uncovering, had time to prepare, but it was still frightening, still overwhelming. Did we do the right thing? Freya asked one night, curled against Marlowe's side. Yes, you absolutely did, even though it was scary. Especially because it was scary. Bravery isn't not being afraid, it's being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. The final trial session lasted 3 days. Percival and Venetia were found guilty of conspiracy, treason, attempted regicide, and a dozen lesser charges. The sentence was exile for Venetia, considered lenient due to her cooperation. For Percival, who'd orchestrated everything, the sentence was harsher. Life imprisonment, his lands seized, his title stripped. As the guards led him away, he turned to Marlowe. This is your fault, he spat. You came here, corrupted the cubs with Southern ideas, turned them into spies. You're the real traitor. The real traitor, Caspian said coldly, is the man who tried to murder his king and restart a war for profit. Guards remove him. The chamber emptied slowly. Council members dispersed, whispering about the narrow escape, the cunning of the young princesses, the uncertain future. Lady Isolde approached Marlowe. "You're a good influence on those children," she said. "They learned their courage from you. They had courage long before I arrived. Perhaps, but you taught them how to use it wisely." Isolde's eyes were kind. "What will you do now? The contract is void. The king is free to choose his own path." Marlowe looked across the chamber to where Caspian stood with his daughters, listening to something Cordelia was saying with grave attention. "I don't know," she admitted. "I came here to help the cubs heal. That work isn't finished." "No," Isolde agreed, "but perhaps it's evolved into something else, something more permanent." Before Marlowe could respond, a messenger arrived requesting the king's presence for an emergency council session. Caspian glanced at Marlowe, something unreadable in his expression, then followed the messenger out. The cubs clustered around Marlowe. "Is he mad at us?" Zinnia asked. "No, little flower, he's proud of you, and probably terrified. You took enormous risks." "It was worth it, though," Cordelia said. "Right now, Papa doesn't have to marry someone he doesn't love." "Now your father is free to make his own choice," Marlowe corrected carefully. "Whatever that choice may be. He'll choose you," Freya said with absolute confidence. "That's not how this works, sweetheart." "Yes, it is." All three cubs regarded her with identical golden eyes. "We chose you first. Papa just needed time to catch up." The emergency council session lasted hours. When Caspian finally emerged, night had fallen. He found Marlowe in the memory garden, tending the flowers the cubs had planted for Celestine. "I thought I'd find you here," he said. "The gardenias needed deadheading, and I needed space to think." He settled onto the stone bench, watching her work. "The council wants me to remarry quickly. They say the kingdom needs stability, needs a queen, needs assurance that the succession is secure." Marlowe's hands stilled on the flowers. "I see. They've suggested several candidates, all politically advantageous, all from respected northern families, all perfectly suitable." He paused. "All completely wrong. Caspian, let me finish, please." He stood crossing to where she knelt among the flowers. "3 months ago, you asked if I was sorry. Sorry my forces killed your husband. Sorry for the war. Sorry for all the pain that stands between us. And I am. I'm sorrier than I can ever express. But I'm not sorry you came here. I'm not sorry my daughters found you. I'm not sorry I fell in love with you." Marlowe's breath caught. "The council can accept what I choose or find another king. I'm done letting politics dictate my personal life. I'm done pretending duty and happiness are mutually exclusive. I'm done." He stopped, took a breath. "I'm done living half a life when the possibility of wholeness is standing right in front of me. I'm not northern nobility. You're better. You're someone my daughters trust completely. Someone who put her life between them and danger without hesitation. Someone who taught them courage and compassion and how to heal from grief. I'm Southern, so the peace needs symbols of North-South unity. What better symbol than a marriage that bridges both? I'm common-born. My mother was a farmer's daughter before my father chose her. The kingdom survived." He took her hands, drawing her to her feet. "Stop listing obstacles and tell me what you want. Not what's practical, not what's politically wise. What does Marlowe Ashford want?" She looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd lost his wife and learned to smile again, who ruled a kingdom but still read bedtime stories to his daughters, who'd chosen peace when war would have been easier, who'd somehow seen past her walls to the woman beneath. "I want," the words stuck in her throat. "I'm afraid." Of what? Of losing again, of letting myself love and having it ripped away, of believing in futures when the past keeps proving how quickly everything can end. She felt tears slip down her cheeks. Dorian was everything. When he died, I thought I died too. I thought the best I could hope for was surviving, existing, going through motions. But then I came here and these cubs needed me and you made me want to live again. And that terrifies me. Because wanting makes you vulnerable. Loving makes you breakable. "Yes," Caspian agreed. "It does. I know that as well as anyone. Celestine's death nearly destroyed me. For 2 years I was a ghost wearing a crown. Functioning but not living. And then you walked into my life, holding my daughters, and something in me woke up. Something I thought was dead. Hope maybe, or possibility, or just the courage to try again." He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away tears. "I can't promise I won't die. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. I can't promise perfect happiness. But I can promise this, whatever time we have, I'll spend it choosing you, choosing us, choosing the family we could build together. And if the universe takes that from us, at least we'll have had it. At least we'll have tried. That's a terrifying promise, Marlo whispered. It's the only honest one I can make. So I'm asking, will you try with me? Will you take this risk? Will you, he took a breath, will you marry me, Marlo? Ashford, be my wife, my queen, my partner. Help me raise my daughters. Help me build this peace. Help me remember how to be more than just a king with a crown. Marlo felt the question settle over her like a cloak. Heavy, significant, irrevocable, once accepted. She thought of Dorian, of Octavia's letter. Live, Marlo. That's the only way to honor the dead, by refusing to join them before your time. She thought of Cordelia, Freya, and Zinnia. 3 small souls who'd chosen her, trusted her, needed her. She thought of this man, this impossible, wonderful, complicated man who'd somehow found space in his grieving heart for one more person. She thought of the choice before her: safety and isolation, or risk and connection. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Caspian's smile could have lit the entire kingdom. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers in the northern gesture she'd come to treasure. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people who'd found each other across battle lines, across grief, across impossible odds. 2 people choosing to try. The Cubs are watching from the window, Marlo murmured. I know. They've been watching us for weeks, plotting, scheming. They're terrible at being subtle. They saved everything, you know that, right? Without their investigation. Without you, they wouldn't have had the courage to investigate. You taught them that protecting what you love is worth any risk. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. When should we tell them? I suspect they already know. As if on cue, 3 small figures burst from the palace doors and sprinted across the garden nightgowns, flying faces radiant with joy. You said yes. Zinnia reached them first, launching herself at Marlo with enough force to nearly knock her over. We saw everything, Freya added, beaming. It worked, Cordelia announced with satisfaction. Then more vulnerably, you're really staying forever. Marlo knelt, gathering all 3 into her arms. Forever, I promise. Good. Cordelia's young face was fierce. Because we already decided you're our mother. We were just waiting for Papa and you to figure it out. We're excellent planners, Freya added. The best, Zinnia agreed. Caspian laughed, that rich, warm sound Marlo had learned to treasure. I've been outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 5-year-old. They learned from the best, Marlo said. They learned from you. The formal announcement came 3 days later. The kingdom's response was mixed. Northern nobles grumbled about bloodlines and tradition. Southern leadership sent cautious congratulations tinged with political calculation. Common citizens north and south seemed largely pleased. A marriage between former enemies symbolized the peace they were all trying to build. Wolf sent a letter. Marlo, congratulations on your engagement. I won't pretend I'm not conflicted. This is the king whose forces killed my brother. But I remember what Dorian said about you, that you had the biggest heart and the strongest will of anyone he'd ever met. If you've chosen this path, you must have good reason. I'm coming to understand what you meant at the funeral, about honoring loss by choosing to live. It's hard, but I'm trying too. Be happy. That's all he would have wanted. With love, Wolf. The wedding planning was chaos. Lady Isolde took charge, navigating the complex politics of a ceremony that needed to honor both northern and southern traditions. The Cubs helped, which mostly meant adding increasingly elaborate suggestions that ranged from adorable to absurd. Ember should carry the rings, Zinnia insisted. Obviously, Isolde agreed. I've already commissioned a special collar. And we should release doves, Freya added. Wolves release doves, Marlo raised an eyebrow. It's symbolic, Cordelia explained with exaggerated patience. Doves represent peace. We're celebrating peace and marriage together. The doves might not appreciate being released in a room full of wolves, Caspian pointed out. Then butterflies, Freya amended. Butterflies are harder to catch. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Marlo stood for her final dress fitting. The gown was a masterpiece, northern silk in deep blue, southern embroidery, in silver thread, blending both cultures into something new and beautiful. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. You're radiant, Isolde said. I'm terrified. Also normal. The older woman adjusted a fold of fabric. May I give you some advice from one who married into this family decades ago? Please. Being queen isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, about trying, about letting people see you're human, not a symbol. The North will judge you, the South will question you, the court will test you. But if you lead with the same heart you show those children, you'll do fine. And if I fail, then you'll get up and try again. That's all any of us can do. The wedding day arrived wrapped in autumn gold. The palace chapel was filled with representatives from both kingdoms, northern wolves in traditional furs, southern wolves in ceremonial leathers. Military leaders who'd fought on opposite sides sat in the same room, united in celebrating a peace they'd all bled to achieve. Marlowe stood in the preparation chamber, heart pounding, second-guessing everything. "You look beautiful." Cordelia appeared in the doorway wearing her flower girl dress, silver silk with blue ribbons. Her sisters flanked her, equally adorable. "I look like I'm about to face a firing squad." "You look like our mama," Zinnia corrected. "The one we chose, the one who chose us back." "Are you ready?" Freya asked. Was she ready to stand before hundreds of people and pledge her life to a man she'd met months ago? Ready to become stepmother to 3 royal cubs who'd wormed their way into her heart? Ready to be queen of a kingdom that had killed her husband? Ready to choose life over mere survival? "Yes," Marlowe said, "I'm ready." The ceremony was beautiful. Traditional northern vows blended with southern commitment rituals. Caspian stood at the altar in formal black, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked down the aisle. The cubs preceded her, scattering flower petals with serious concentration. When Marlowe reached the altar, Caspian took her hands. "I wasn't expecting you," he said softly, speaking the traditional northern vow. "But you came anyway, and you changed everything." "I wasn't looking for you," Marlowe responded with the southern counter vow. "But you found me anyway, and you gave me reason to hope." They spoke their promises to honor, to cherish, to build together what war had tried to destroy. They exchanged rings, simple bands inscribed with words in both northern and southern dialects. They pressed foreheads together, then joined hands, blending both cultures' marriage gestures. When the officiant pronounced them married, the chapel erupted in cheers. Not everyone was pleased. Marlowe could see the disapproving faces in the crowd, but enough were happy that it felt like victory. The celebration afterward was elaborate. Food from both kingdoms, music blending northern drums with southern strings, dancing that mixed traditional styles into something new. Through it all, Caspian stayed close, a hand at the small of her back, a smile across the room, small gestures that said, "I'm here. We're doing this together." Late in the evening, Marlowe stepped onto a balcony for air. The palace gardens spread below, beautiful in the moonlight. Somewhere in the garden, Ember was playing with 3 small figures who should have been asleep hours ago. "Hiding from your own wedding," Caspian joined her, offering a glass of wine. "Catching my breath, being the center of attention is exhausting. Welcome to royalty, it doesn't get easier." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "Do you regret it?" Caspian asked quietly. Saying yes, Marlowe considered the question honestly. Did she regret choosing this complicated, impossible, beautiful path? "No," she said. "I don't regret it. I'm terrified of it, but I don't regret it." "That's good, because I'd hate to have married someone with regrets." He pulled her close, and they stood watching their combined kingdoms find common ground through celebration. Tomorrow would bring challenges, politics, judgment, the hard work of building peace one choice at a time. But tonight they had this. 1 year later, Marlowe stood in the palace gardens watching Cordelia teach a group of northern and southern children the fundamentals of tracking. At 9, she was already showing leadership skills that would serve her well as future queen. Freya sat nearby, sketching the scene with an artist's eye. Zinnia was supposedly helping, but mostly playing with the other children's wolves. The grief counseling program Marlowe had established was thriving. War widows from both kingdoms met weekly, sharing stories, supporting each other, learning that loss was loss, regardless of which side you'd fought for. Many had found friendships across former battle lines. Some had even found new love. The peace schools were full, waiting lists growing. Parents who'd fought each other now sent their children to learn together, to build friendships that would make future wars unthinkable. And in the memory garden, Celestine's flowers bloomed beside newly planted sections honoring other fallen, including a small plot where Marlowe had placed Dorian's marker, moved from the south with Wolf's blessing, so he could rest in the garden where his widow had found new life. "How are you feeling?" Caspian appeared at her side, placing a gentle hand on her slightly rounded belly. "Large, uncomfortable, ready for this baby to arrive already." "Only 2 more months. Easy for you to say. You're not the one growing a whole person." He laughed, pulling her close. "True, but I'm growing something too." "Oh, hope for the future, for our children, all 4 of them, for kingdoms learning to be allies instead of enemies." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "For us." Marlowe leaned into him, watching their blended family in the gardens. Northern cubs and southern cubs playing together. Widows finding community. Warriors becoming friends. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd walked away that first day?" she asked. "If I'd left the cubs to find their own way home? Every day, and every day I'm grateful you didn't." Me too. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. They ate around the large table in the informal dining room, the cubs chattering about their day. Tell us about the first time you met Papa, Zinnia requested. You've heard that story 100 times, Marlo protested. We like it, Freya insisted. It's our favorite, Cordelia added. The part where you were brave enough to tell Papa he needed better childcare. Caspian caught Marlo's eye across the table, his smile warm. You were terrifying and brave, and you did save them. You saved all of us, really. I think we saved each other, Marlo said. After the cubs were tucked into bed, she and Caspian retreated to their private chambers. Tired, he asked. Exhausted. Pregnancy does that. They settled into bed together, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the small movements of their child. Outside, Shadowcrest slept under watchful stars. I love you, Marlo said softly. I wasn't sure I'd ever say that to anyone again. But I love you. I love this life we've built. I love our children. I love what we're creating together. I love you too, more than I thought possible after Celestine. Different, but no less real. Marlo closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the gentle movements of their unborn child, the peace of a family choosing love over loss. They'd survived war. They'd survived loss. They'd survived the impossible journey from enemy to family. And now they would thrive. Down the hall, 3 small girls dreamed of the sibling soon to arrive, of the kingdom they would inherit, one built on peace instead of conquest, of the future their parents had chosen to fight for with love instead of weapons. From what they'd lost, they'd grown something new. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it define the future. That was the truest kind of healing, the bravest kind of hope.